fight game. That's the way it goes. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. But it was still a great fight. It was still a great fight.
Logan, what did you think of the decision?
Absolutely. I think it's Tommy right.
You think you want the rematch immediately?
Jake and Tommy?
Yeah.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. Which means I get to fight the first
By the way, can I have a prime?
Oh, it's a KSI one. So
Oh, yeah, thank you, bro.
I appreciate you. I saw that, man.
Logan, thoughts on the decision?
It's a fight game. That's the way it goes. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. But it was still a great fight. It was still a great fight.
Logan, what did you think of the decision?
Absolutely.
So, as you guys know, combat sports is probably one of the most unpredictable sports entities there is in the entire world. I mean, first and foremost, in the beginning of this weekend, you had a UFC card that featured Ryan Spann versus Nikhaila Krylov, in which Nikhaila Krylov and Ryan Spann were fighting for top positions in the 205 division, especially with a new and unexpected 205 champion. And lo and behold, the main event falls off. Brendan Allen and Munez gets moved up to a main event position and not even going 5 rounds, but that's because they were just slated there at a 1 day's notice, and not even a 1 day's notice, a couple of hours notice, so it wouldn't be fair to give them 5 rounds. Nonetheless, that's the reality of combat sports as we know it. And what had just happened with Jake Paul versus Tommy Fury, I think was also very unexpected at the same time. Many people that are, let's say, boxing pugilists are going to say, I'm not surprised. The reason why they're not surprised is because of this status quo way of thinking in which we look at Tommy Fury as the conventional boxer, whereas even though Jake Paul puts in the work, does the road running, does the rounds and sparring, does the bag work, does all the sit-ups, does all the things that normal boxers do, including these towel drills where he's conditioning his neck to take impact, and all these little intricacies that you need to become a boxer, he's somehow not looked at in the same category as someone like Tommy Fury. Well, why is that? Well, let's unpack a few things, right? Well, because first and foremost, we thought that Tommy Fury was the underdog in this fight. Now, we got to ask ourselves, what makes people think of something like this? Was it because of the fact that Jake Paul was just coming in here, running through everybody, knocking everybody out? Haven't we learned from somebody like Tyson Fury, who took on somebody like Deontay Wilder, who was doing the same thing, knocking dudes out within the first round, and then they go in there and get outclassed by a much technical boxer? And just like his brother Tyson gets knocked down in the final round only to get back up and do exactly as what his brother did, which was fight on till the last round and eventually win the fight. Or in Tyson and Wilder's case in the first fight, getting a decision of a draw, which was controversial, and then it led to a couple more fights that really just settled the entire factor of this controversy into rivalry. Well, now you got Tommy Fury, fast forward to 2023, from 2018 to 2020 and 21. Now you got Tommy Fury in a world attention type of event where you got Jake Paul, who's a social media superstar, now taking on this guy who comes from a very legendary family in the Fury family. And they're thinking to themselves, you know what, we're going to name this The Truth. Well, the reason why they wanted to name the event that was because we wanted to find out, what is the truth? Is it true that if you spend enough time perfecting your craft and you come from an athletic background such as Jake Paul, growing up in one of the most toughest states to wrestle in, which is Ohio, does that constitute you as somebody that could be a legitimate boxer? I would certainly think that that's the case. There's a lot of boxers that come from very athletic backgrounds that had nothing to do with boxing, or maybe sometimes had nothing to do with martial arts. Of course, people forget, just like Deontay Wilder, who was there that night in attendance and was supposed to make some sort of announcement, but held back for whatever reason that he did, perhaps maybe legal reasons or other reasons of perhaps a promotion, wanting to keep his lips sealed for a future announcement of some sort. But whatever it was, one thing that you could take from Deontay Wilder was that he was a former athlete as well, that didn't really come from any type of martial arts background, but used that explosiveness and that power that he gained from what I would call the American sporting system of having to build yourself up for football, for wrestling. In Deontay Wilder's case, more so for football and basketball, which, by the way, is a sport that really requires a lot of explosive actions in order for you to negotiate against your opponent. Nonetheless, Jake Paul was able to use that and beat an NBA star, beat a couple of mixed martial arts fighters that were part-time boxers, whereas he was training as a full-time boxer with all the right nutritionists, all the right team to help him harness his game into this realm of professionalism. And then the one word that always comes out from everybody amongst all of this fiasco, or this, whatever you want to call this, circus of an event, as what people perceive it to be, they call them novices. And I got to ask myself, well, what is the reality of that? Because are they novice to the sense where, okay, not every 8-0 or 6-0 fighter is obviously championship material. Very few that you could find that are like that, at least in the historical context of boxing. Now, a lot of people didn't understand that when Lennox Lewis was coming up from Canada to America to England and all these different domestic scenes that he was coming from, the Olympics and into the pros, one of the things that people didn't consider was that he didn't fight for a British title up until his 20th fight. And by the way, this is often referenced when they compare him to Anthony Joshua in terms of what Anthony Joshua was able to accomplish in a short amount of time. So what is a novice in that regard? Tommy Fury has realistically only had 8 amateur bouts. And I found this out when I was listening to an IFL interview with Umar interviewing Shane Fury, which was one of the brothers of Tyson and Tommy Fury, one of the Fury family members that ultimately doesn't box, but just lets all the other brothers do it. Nonetheless, he mentions something very interesting. He thought that this was a very 50-50 fight. And he came out honest, saying to the effect that, you know what, it's not anything to play with when it comes to making these stipulations and bets of winner takes all type of situation. Well, for one, a lot of people really need to understand it wasn't like the Saudis were going to allow something like that, because obviously in their country, as you know, it's an Islamic country, in case anybody didn't know for whatever reason, okay? And in Islam, as you also guys may not know or may know, gambling is not allowed. So the Saudis having this sense of perhaps trying to sanction something like this would be highly implausible to every degree. Now, what about the fact that the possibility of one guy walking out of there without getting any pay? That wasn't going to happen. The Saudis were not going to allow somebody who is essentially a worker, right? Whether you're an athlete, whether you're a janitor, whether you're working in their medical systems, whether you're working in their armed forces, or whether you're a hotel housekeeper, to whatever degree you are in Saudi society, getting paid or not getting paid for a job is more than just a sin, but obviously an offense to Allah Almighty. So the chances of that happening was just not there and was never going to be present. Tongue-in-cheek, as the way that Shane Fury describes it, of course, that's exactly what it was. Being that they were not going to go through with something like that, but guess what? It looks good on the face-off. It looks good on the promos. It looks good on trying to get fans' attention or trying to get them to talk and engage with each other on social media, and that's exactly what happened. So that wasn't going to happen. And the interesting thing about that interview in the IFL with Shane Fury was basically the way that he described it was opening the fourth wall, or as they say in professional wrestling, where they kind of reveal the act of what is going on. Of course it is an act. Of course these guys may not really hate each other to that certain degree. And then they even asked Shane Fury, hey, what do you think about Jake's comments? Saying something to the effect of what he said about Molly or this and that. He said, well, it's just all tongue-in-cheek. It doesn't really seem like he really said anything that offensive. And by the end of the day, these guys are going in there to fight, and that's that. I really enjoyed the pragmatic view in the way that Shane Fury described it. By the end of it all, that's really all that it was. And as you know, the way that they ended the fight, just like any other fight where they build up this rivalry and in the end they shake hands and say to each other how much they respect them, especially if they go to distance or if they both had a hard fight where they go back and forth, or if one guy gets finished, or if they really just go to a decision, and that's that. But nonetheless, most fights, for a 90% rate, most guys respect each other. And then, of course, the other 10% of the beef and the real animosity, or perhaps the history that the two fighters have with each other in their rivalry, yes, that in and of itself is a bonus. But ultimately, even with that, they shake hands and respect each other, because by the end of the day, this is one of the toughest things in the world that you're ever going to do. And nobody in the world is really going to understand and feel the way that you feel as much as your opponent does. Not the people that adore you, not the people that side with you, not even the people that train with you, not unless they're fighters themselves that can understand and empathize that walk that you have to take in front of an arena, in front of people of millions around the world watching, and then the pressure that comes with that. Well, the way that Tommy Fury reacted after the fight, I thought to myself, man, this is a man that is absolutely relieved of the war that he just went through. Because there's one thing that I noticed about war. And of course, this is a combat sports show. I don't pretend to be anything else other than that. But of course, I like to bring different dynamics and different lessons from outside of martial arts and outside of the prize fighting boxing world, and try to build some kind of story or lesson to that. And that what that lesson is that when men go to war, there is a certain level of respect that they have for each other, even in the most deadliest conflicts throughout history. And what do I mean by this? Well, I've heard from a lot of former U.S. service guys that mention how much they respect the insurgency, or they respect the Taliban and this and that. And what do I mean by that? Let me explain in context. What they mean is that they've said oftentimes that if a foreign country ever came to my country in the United States, I myself would be an insurgent and attack this force, whether that would be China or whether that would be Russia or whether that would be some kind of aggressive actor anywhere in the world theater of the geopolitical mess that we're in the current times and the current events that we have. But nonetheless, that's the reality of people that fight in wars, is there is a certain level of respect that they even have for their greatest enemy. And that is no different than with Jake Paul and Tommy Fury tonight. And even before that, even prior to the fight, I think people started understanding at some point, this is somebody that I have to respect, because even leading up to the fight, John Fury started to really switch up his tone with Jake Paul. Now, we've seen in the Abu Dhabi fight where Floyd Mayweather was the headliner, I believe, in his last headliner that he did. And by the way, how about the one that he did in the O2 Arena this week? I'm not going to talk too much about that, but let's just say that, yeah, he went through the exhibition. Obviously, he went the distance. It was against this guy, Aaron Kalmers, who was a former True Geordie star. I'm sorry, not True Geordie, but Geordie Shore star, which is the Jersey Shore version of the UK, hence the name Geordie Shore. And he fought him. He's also an MMA fighter at some point of his life. And just Floyd thought, you know what, this is a big name in that part of the world. So I'm going to go out there with Union Jack shorts and fight this guy in an exhibition. But unfortunately, barely any people were there. Okay, so that's Floyd versus Aaron Kalmers. Everyone, yay, clap it up. Okay, back to Jake Paul and Tommy Fury. So now back to Jake Paul and Tommy Fury. Yeah, you got to understand that this is a concept of war in which men eventually respect each other after coming out from it. And what I was just saying prior to when I was going on a tangent about Floyd Mayweather was John was sort of turning a leaf over to Jake Paul, where he was kind of showing him respect. Even Shane Fury himself was sort of doing that. Now, Tyson Fury, obviously, he's the real alpha male in this entire room. He was very indifferent to the whole thing. Obviously, he's going to be supportive of his brother, but he never really had any sense of hatred or animosity towards the Pauls in any kind of way. He just felt like he was the bigger guy in the whole situation, where he was just above all this, where he's got bigger fish to fry, such as trying to get a fight with Usyk or maybe Ngannou, or maybe even a fourth fight with Deontay Wilder. But nonetheless, another interesting takeaway from the fight was when, in between the rounds, Logan Paul got on the microphone with Radio Raheem, and this is something boxing does in ways that we don't normally see in MMA. In between rounds, they would interview somebody from the crowd, or maybe that would be somebody of a fighter's interest, or maybe a fighter's family member, or so on and so forth. They flip over to Logan Paul, and then he calls the entire Fury family BICTH, and I'm like thinking to myself, where is all this coming from? Is this just from a healthy competition of the heat of the battle of what's going on at the current moment, or is this just one of those situations where they may have had some sort of altercation that we may not have seen prior to the fight, or it just got really personal to this level in the ways that Khabib and Conor did after the UFC 229 fight, in which you've seen even after that fight, they just were not going to shake hands with each other to any degree, and in fact continued with even more of a street fight after Khabib was able to choke Conor out. So here we are. All of a sudden, they give a good account of themselves, both of these gentlemen, both of these lads, and they show the professionalism that they are able to manage in crisis during a boxing match. Tommy Fury got knocked down. He got back up. Jake showed that he's up there. Let me tell you, one of the things that I think was missing with Jake in this entire fight was really nothing. He boxed perfectly. The problem is that when you got a guy like Tommy Fury, who's 6 feet tall and has an 80-inch reach, there's just nothing that you're going to do about that. He's going to tag you, he's going to hit you, and he's going to get there a lot quicker than you will. So that's that. That's the only reason why. And historically, I got to tell you guys, this is the perfect body for boxing. They always say that John Jones has the perfect body for mixed martial arts. Yes, that's very true. Because he's tall, he's lanky, and then on top of that, the guy has wrestled all his life. Well, Tommy Fury is the quintessential perfect boxer, especially for his weight class. Now, here's the thing. Here's a controversial thing that I think a lot of people can agree on, and it's not really a bad stereotype in any kind of way. Historically, African Americans dominate boxing, along with Mexicans, of course, but historically, let's just call it what it is. It's African Americans that dominate boxing. Well, why is that? A big part of it is because, let's just say that they have long arms, and that's sort of an advantage in this kind of sport. Now, in MMA, you can close the distance, use close range, use wrestling, trips, clinches, takedowns, and all of that, ground control to mitigate the chaos that you're dealing with. In boxing, you can't really do that. All that you can really do is use your punches or punch your way out of things or move your way out of things. But guess what? If you got a guy that has an 80-inch reach, there's just almost nothing that you could do about it. And weirdly enough, according to the fight stats going into this fight at the end of it, they say that Jake's jabs were a lot of a higher percentage. Not the punches overall, but just his jabs. And Tommy Fury has thrown somewhat of 300 some odd punches in this fight with a high volume against Jake Paul. So you got to think to yourself, this guy really trained in terms of his output. And then on top of that, he knew that his output was going to be what was going to win him this fight because of the fact that he had the reach advantage. So now, what is next for Jake Paul and Tommy Fury in this regard? Well, one of the things that I can tell you is that there's a possibility they're going to rematch each other. And even if not, there's a great possibility in obtaining different types of opponents in the upcoming fights that they may have. For example, you already had Jake Paul making the negotiation deals with Nate Diaz. So it makes sense because guess what? If Jake Paul was to win this fight tonight, it would almost be like a step back for him to take on Nate Diaz because he's already defeated a quote-unquote real boxer. And again, we can debate night and day about the reality of this context, but the fact of the matter is that Nate Diaz is now the perfect opponent for Jake Paul in any way that you cut it. Of course, the rematch is always there. He does have the rematch clause. Tommy Fury, I'm sure, wouldn't mind taking that. He's probably thinking to himself, man, I can outbox this guy again. And we could probably make even more money this time. And of course, you know how rematches go, right? With a heated rivalry like this, they go and shake hands after the fact. They say to themselves, you know what? Good fight. You belong here. You are a pro. You gave me some of the toughest tests that I ever had to experience my whole entire career. But nonetheless, we can go dance again and for even more money. And then when that happens, all the respect goes out the window. They're going to go and have social media tirades at each other. And then the beef starts all over again, getting recycled into this promo that they're trying to lure people in for the second time, and this time even more people with the new drama that perhaps they're going to manufacture. That's the reality of what combat sports is. You've seen it with Daniel Cormier and John Jones. You guys remember every time that they fought, okay, it's always respect after the fact. Even when you saw the first fight with John Jones where you saw him just screaming at the camera, relieved that he was able to get this decision against DC. And then in the second time around, he was able to knock out DC, which, by the way, got overturned to a no contest because he popped dirty for that fight. He even goes on the mic and says to Daniel Cormier, man, you're a role model. You're a great training partner. You're a good man, a good Olympian, somebody that I could look up to, even after just head kicking him. And then after that, guess what? They go back to beefing again. That's just the reality of this whole situation. So, yes, rematch is in the horizon, but what about Tommy in that regard? Well, I think Tommy would probably need to move on at some point, even if he was to, let's say, beat Jake Paul again, or maybe perhaps lose to him in another split decision in the rematch. I don't think would be really that bad for their career. In fact, you could picture these two guys as young as they are right now. Think about this in perspective. So these guys fought tonight at 185, right? Perhaps maybe they could fight at 175 later down the road, or maybe cruiserweight. You look at the champions that are in that weight class. Badu Jack, who, by the way, tonight just knocked out Makabu. By the way, how about the way that Badu Jack knocked down Makabu in the same fashion that Tony Bellew did to Makabu, right? Punched him and rolled him over in that same regard. But nonetheless, shout outs to him becoming the first Muslim champion in Saudi Arabia, winning it in Saudi Arabia, and one of the oldest cruiserweight champions ever at 39 years old. So big ups to him for that. And by the way, let's say Jake Paul or Tommy Fury wanted to fight this guy later down the road. It wouldn't be that far-fetched if, let's say, in a hypothetical world, Badu Jack doesn't fight for 2 years, and maybe the WBC allows him to keep the title, and then within those 2 years, let's say, hypothetically speaking, let's use Tommy as an example because he won tonight. He gets a couple of wins. He beats real ranked guys in the higher echelons of the 175 and the cruiserweight divisions, maybe even fights both divisions. So when he does that, he gets a shot against Badu Jack later down the road, gets better. It's not that implausible that in those couple of years that Tommy Fury could get up there and perhaps maybe fight him and win the title. It's not that far-fetched. So this idea that people say, oh, well, they're novices or this and that, I think people need to understand that, yes, they are novices to that degree, but you also got to think how young they are. Now, Tommy is only 23 years old. Jake is 26 years old. Can you imagine what they are like in 10 years' time when they are at their prime? These guys have 10 years ahead of them, maybe even more, to give the fans in terms of what it is that they can offer to the world. So that's something to keep in mind. It's not that far-fetched that in a couple of years they are within a contender's range. I mean, you're telling me that somebody like Anthony Yard, in that same regard, couldn't do it? Or can do it, but they can't do it? What makes them any different? And this is one of those things I want to unpack right here. Because going into this fight, a lot of people thought that Jake Paul was going to win. Guess what? I was one of those people. Because I really believed in Jake's ability to close the distance, to hit hard shots. And he did all that. But in the end, Tommy Fury showed what a boxer really is. Because Jake does have the athletic ability. He does have the attributes. He is what I would call a quintessential American athlete, meaning that you grew up playing these American sports that emphasizes an explosion, emphasizes in strength and explosion, and then translating that into combat sports, adding the cardio and the technique along with it. Well, guess what? Tommy Fury was none of those things other than just a boxer his entire life. He was just doing boxing. He was just doing nothing but punching, and he was doing nothing but practicing exactly that and doing it in 50 to 100 million ways of catching you in different scenarios that he has already embedded in his mind as some kind of muscle memory of some sort. So that's the reality of Tommy Fury. It was just a classic case of athlete taking on a true professional in Tommy Fury. So you got to think to yourself, just like this, back-to-back weekends with big fights. How about UFC 285 with a huge card ahead of ourselves, right? Gane versus Jones. Now, a lot of people are picking John Jones to win this fight, but there's also a strong minority out there that's picking Gane, and for reasons of size, for reasons of elusive movement that John Jones in the past has had real problems with, such as the likes of Dominic Reyes, even Alexander Gustafsson 10 years ago when he fought him in Toronto. The common denominator here is they almost beat John Jones, or arguably some can say that he took that decision away from them and was robbed, in whatever subjective world you want to look at that at. And then think to yourself that, you know what? This is the formula to beat John Jones. Somebody who is not really used to a high elusive movement. And then on top of that, there's this aspect of people putting into the emphasis of him going into the weight room. He's getting bigger, but at the same time, he's also getting slower. You see, there's guys out there that move up a weight class and are able to keep a certain level of explosion in them. But there's also a certain level of slowness that kind of has a diminishing return when people move up a weight or people build some sort of muscle. And many people have been citing that when they see John Jones hit the pads in recent times, they're thinking to themselves, man, he looks really slow. Now, I don't know how much stock I really have to put into that, because you got to think to yourself, there's this different speed that you can operate in when it comes to, let's say, sparring or even real fighting, as opposed to just hitting pads, trying to get your technique down right. And that's the problem where we judge people of hitting pads, because we think to ourselves like, man, this guy looks really slow, when all we may have known is that maybe the guy was just trying to work on his technique. And sometimes that's what you need to do. One of my earlier days doing Muay Thai, I remember doing a lot of these techniques really slow. And I'm talking about the conventional or basics of the 1-2 punch, uppercut, hook, this and that, knee, elbow, even down to the spinning elbow. Eventually, I just tried to do it slow to where I got up to a certain level of speed where I felt comfortable doing it. But you can't put too much stock into that. And then, obviously, somewhere down the line, I started understanding how to do these types of techniques, and it became a muscle memory to me. So it just became a lot easier to do it faster. But again, different philosophies in the way that different people approach things. Because for me, if I'm going to hit the pads or if I'm going to hit the punching bag, I'm going to show you everything that I have and how I'm going to do it. Because there's nothing like simulating a fight in ways of simulating a fight. Meaning that if you're going to hit pads, you're going to hit pads like you're actually in a fight. Meaning that you're going to be aware of your movements. You're going to be aware of your footwork. You're going to be aware of setting up shots, throwing one shots, faking one shot to get another, throwing one shot to get to one range to another, or maybe I'm revealing a little too much of what type of technical apparatus that I have in my mind that I'm trying to reveal to you. But nonetheless, I think you understand what I mean. I think that different guys just have a different way of training, and I wouldn't put too much stock into, especially when they're showing you hitting pads. You guys seen Floyd Mayweather, the way that he hits pads. It's very choreographed. But you got to think to yourself, he's not hitting guys in that consecutive amount of motion the way that he does in the pads. He's not doing that to people in a fight unless you got a guy rocked and you got him in a corner and then he's stuck there and he's not moving because he's in a lot of pain from the shots that you gave him, whether it was rocking him on his head or giving him a good body shot that really stung him and now he can't move. Whatever it is, you're not hitting a guy with multiple combinations or a 7-punch combination if you have them in that type of thing, because more often than not, if you're dealing with somebody that knows what they're doing or has an understanding for technical proficiency, even in the slightest bit, they're not going to be a perfect target for you. You're constantly going to be dealing with a moving target, in which, why I phrase the term, having to negotiate the chaos that is around you. Okay? So, yeah, again, with that tangent that I'm going off of, understand the point that I'm trying to make is that you can't put too much stock into how somebody hits pads. And even if you see that that's the way that they fight, guess what? They're going to have to react differently when they're taking on somebody in a fight. So that's what you're going to get out of this early preview of the John Jones versus Gunn. And that is the conclusion of Tommy Fury versus Jake Paul. What a beautiful phrase. Welcome to the theater of the unknown, because that was the reality of what we saw tonight. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and have a beautiful and great weekend that has already ended in this Sunday night, which is a weird time to have fights, but that is why they call it the theater of the unknown.